Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. We just finished the trade deadline a couple hours ago here, and it was a weird day anticipating stuff that was going to happen that ultimately really didn't. But it was a day for us prospect huggers to really be worried about our favorite guys leaving the organization.
Yeah, man, it was a wild weekend. I was on a personal note. I was out of town at a wedding this weekend, and so I was trying to make sure I was kind of keeping track in case an early trade happened. And then I actually came back home on Sunday, and we actually adopted a little puppy. And so I've
Nice.
been running around the house trying to keep up with this puppy. My wife's down with it right now. So if you guys listening on the podcast hear some barking, that's what it is. It's a brand new puppy. So so my weekend's been crazy in addition to all the Cubs stuff. And I've been trying to pay attention and check tweets and or Zeets or whatever we're calling them in the meantime. But yeah, it's been kind of wild.
Did you name the puppy after Chase Trump?
I did not name it after. I did after Parker Chavers. No, I'm kidding. No, no. There's no Cubs name with it. Which I mean, there are obviously some Cubs names on the short list, but I ended up not going with the Cubs name. So yeah, I think it would have been Chavers or Strumpf or Wicks or I don't know. I've been there. Just pick a day, and there's people on the internet saying that I am a weird prospect hugger for some random prospect. So actually, we're gonna get into a couple guys that we've both been accused of being a prospect hugger for. I'm sure over the
Totally.
course of time, but we really have. We probably shouldn't have done this big intro here, but we got a jam packed episode. This may be our most full episode with different things going on. It's gonna be a longer episode, I'm sure. Bryan, you and I will try to keep it short, but the reason why it's going to be long is we have a couple fun tidbits throughout this episode. Up at the top, we'll talk about some housekeeping. There's been some promotions throughout the system. We'll get into that. And then we'll start digging in to the trade deadline. So we're going to kind of cover everything that happened during the Cubs trade deadline from a prospect slant, a prospect perspective. Obviously, that's what we do here. We'll dig into that. And part of that trade, spoiler alert, DJ Herz was sent away as a part of a trade deal. So we're going to actually include a little bit of an interview that Jimmy Nelligan and I did as a part of the Growing Cubs podcast back in the day. We're going to insert a little bit of that interview with DJ because it was such a great interview, one of our favorites. So that will come in this episode as well. And then towards the very end of this episode, I actually had the chance to go over to Peoria and watch the South Bend Cubs play last week. So I've got some notes from my time there, including at the very end, we'll have an interview with Frankie Scalzo Jr., which was awesome because Frankie's a vibe. So that'll be all happening in this episode. It's a loaded one, but you want to start up at the top here?
Yeah, I mean, I think if a bigger trade had happened in the Cubs organization, we would probably start with the trades. As a result of what actually did happen, I think the story for the farm system this week is probably that we're going to find some top prospects in new places. I mean, I'd say three of the top five prospects in the system are now starting the week at a new home. And so I kind of think we got to start there, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're recording this on a day later than normal, as you guys know. We're recording this on Tuesday night, so games are already happening throughout the system, and we're seeing that PCA has been called up to AAA Iowa, which is about, I don't know, a month later so. And then Cade Horton has also been promoted up from South Bend up to AA Tennessee just a year after he was drafted. And then Matt Shaw and Josh Rivera, for what it's worth, have been assigned to South Bend. They skipped over Myrtle Beach out of the Arizona Complex League, and they are at a full season affiliate. So I don't know, man. Let's start with PCA up at the top. It's awesome that he is now finally in Iowa. Like I said, I published the breaking news piece over at Northside Bound, and I had that saved as a draft over at Northside Bound for literally about a month, I think. And I had to continually redo the stats and edit that post as it was happening, as there was a scare that, it might be coming now. But it finally happened. PCA, center field, Iowa Cubs.
Yeah, I mean, it had to be exhausting for him a little bit because he had to know that it was really close. And I would imagine every time he had a good game in July, it had to be like, all right, this is the night that they're going to tell me. This is the night that they're going to tell me. And it just didn't happen for a while. So it just had to be a real strange couple weeks for Pete. Um, but I'm glad that he eventually did get that tap on the shoulder and told to head to Des Moines. And, I think we can probably overstate how important AAA is in the development ladder. I think it's okay for players to skip that level sometimes, but I think in this case, it's going to be useful to have him there for at least the next 6 weeks, just learning from John Maley, learning pitchers that throw a little differently, and just preparing for next year's major league debut.
Yeah, I mean it's. I know you've kind of continued to mention for a while now about the getting out of a league with the changeup. Obviously, the Southern League no longer has the sticky baseballs that they're using anymore, and so the changeups were back in style, I guess, in the Southern League. But as soon as that happened, right, PCA was just taking off, like he was just killing the ball.
Yep.
So we're seeing him at a level that's more appropriate for him. I don't know. I was asked. I went on the CHGO show today with Cody Delmindo and Luke Stuckmeyer, and they were asking me about PCA and the odds that we see him up in Chicago this year. And I kind of view that as not much different than we saw at the beginning of the year, right? At the beginning of the year, we had hoped that he would kill it in Double-A, and then about mid to late season, get the call up to Iowa before having a chance to make it up to Chicago in the in September. And honestly, I think that a little bit this trade deadline with the acquisition of Jeimer Candelario playing first base, that might, with that sending Cody Bellinger out to center field, it might kind of alter what we're seeing from PCA getting called up a little bit. But I think at the very least, he's has the fast track to being the opening day starting center fielder next year in 2024. But I think there's still a chance that we see him. If the Cubs really need him and really need his help in the playoff push at the end of the year, we could see PCA up in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big factor for me, how he plays in Iowa definitely is a factor, and that's going to matter to the decision for sure, especially if he really struggles or really kills it, that's going to move the needle. But to me, it's like if the Cubs are competitive with 2 weeks to go, if they're within 2 games of the playoffs with 2 weeks to go in the season, that I think will play a bigger role. That's when I think they could add him, in large part because he'd be a really useful bench piece. I mean, just, if he was just called up and told, we're going to use you as a pinch runner late in games, a defensive replacement in certain spots, and we might ask you to hit 5 times when it's a really good matchup. I think he would be really good in that role. And you and I have already talked about just sort of the clubhouse presence he is and how his teammates end up loving him always. So I think if they're competitive, the odds go way up. If they're not competitive, I think there's almost no way, because it would mean just eating a 40-man spot over the winter that you don't have to do. So I think that's the biggest factor at play there.
Yeah, I feel like with PCA too, he would absolutely kill it in that role, right? If he was told, hey, this is the situation, this is exactly what we need you for. It's defense and base running right now. He knows that he's destined for bigger things, right? It's not one of these situations where he wants to do more than what he can at the big league level this year. He knows that he's going to have that, like I said, that fast track to the starting role next year. So if the Cubs came and said, hey, listen, this is what we need from you, he would go all in on that and be just the best possible version of that, which is super, super exciting. I couldn't agree more with that. So
could you imagine we get it's like a 1-1 game with a couple days left in the season. Yan Gomes walks to go to first base. They have PCA come in, pinch run. Christopher Morel up at the plate hits a double to the gap, and we get to watch PCA score from first base to win the game or something. It's impossible to write a more electric scenario than that, I think.
I mean, imagine who would go crazier, PCA crossing the plate or Christopher Morel on second base?
They would end up injuring each other somehow, so maybe we shouldn't want it to happen.
All right, and so PCA, the top hitting prospect in the system, up to Iowa. Cade Horton, the top pitching prospect, up to Tennessee. Obviously, we haven't seen him throw there yet, but like, dude, this has gone about as well as anyone could have imagined from the day they drafted Cade Horton to now.
Yeah, I mean, of the three moves, this is probably the one that surprises me the most, just because, it's probably the least banging down the door situation of the three we're going to talk about. But Cade certainly earned his way there. I think the Cubs really want to just see how it looks, and I think it's going to help them when they start to build a plan for 2024 in the major leagues. Like, that's what I'm talking about here is, if this goes really good in the next 2 months, Cade Horton will be a part of the Cubs 2024 plans. It might not be opening day, but they will have in their notes, this is going to happen at some point. And if it doesn't go well in the next 2 months, then it's probably going to be considered a long shot that he's a part of 2024. And I think I do think that's sort of motivating what they're doing here, because I think they want to see specifically how AA hitters handle the Cade Horton fastball. I think high A hitters were much more successful against it than low A hitters were. I think the question they want to see is it then even more that AA hitters can handle it? And okay, now we might have to change some things in the offseason that we otherwise weren't expecting to.
I was listening to R.M. Layton and Jack McMullen talk on, I think it was on the Call Up Pod. It might have been on Just Baseball show. But they were talking about pitching prospects, and kind of it seems like a new age of how you develop and how you kind of move a pitching prospect up to the major leagues. And the trend feels like now throughout baseball that if a guy is showing major league quality stuff, that the move is to get him up to the big leagues as fast as possible. And then you continue to learn and hone your craft and do all of that up at the major leagues. Or if you need to get shifted back down to AAA, it's like just get him up to the upper levels of AAA and the major leagues as fast as possible. And it looks like that's what's happening with Cade Horton here. I think there's value to doing that. Like, why waste bullets in low A and high A? And why waste bullets even in AA for that matter, So I'm about it. I think it's great. I think that you continue to push him until he struggles mightily,
Sure.
And I think you're right. I think we're entering the stage where I wouldn't be surprised this offseason if we start seeing conversations where it's like, I think that Cade Horton might be in the majors by the end of this year in 2024. It's like, yeah, absolutely. It's very similar to PCA. We had that conversation with PCA. It's like, if you got a guy who's a top prospect starting in AA, or a pitcher who's a top prospect starting in AA, or knock on the door of AAA, it's like, yeah, of course there's a chance that we see him in the major leagues this year, So
yeah, I mean, I would even say it's not the end of this year. Like, the conversations we're going to have this winter are going to be, how many starts does Cade Horton have to be really good at before he starts knocking on the door? And yes. I think we're going to be talking about June of next year being like high time for a Cade Horton debut.
For sure.
The other thing I want to mention real quick is we're probably getting pretty close to his innings limit. And so we don't know that he's going to be there for the rest of the season. I mean, this could be a true cup of coffee where it's like 3-4 starts and then he gets shut down. I think in part how he looks in those couple starts might, if he's really good, push another 10 innings onto it to try to make that innings limit for 2024 that much higher. If he struggles a little bit, just shut him down, work on the things that you're seeing that he needs to work on, and then re-tackle the innings question next season.
That's a great point. Yeah, you're not pushing your luck given the circumstances. Just ride this out. Don't be surprised if you see that innings limit kind of come soon,
Yep.
All right, down one rung. We got Matt Shaw was assigned, and Josh Rivera were both assigned to South Bend. They got 3 games in down in the Arizona Complex League before getting that promotion up. And I'll kick it to you here, but this one's pretty simple. I know that a lot of people were surprised to see them up in South Bend instead of going to Myrtle Beach. I think what it comes down to, we've had conversations about it. What it comes down to is those guys, if they were assigned to Myrtle Beach, they'd be facing off against 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old guys that honestly they're better than right now. You know, they wouldn't be learning anything. They wouldn't be gaining anything developmentally by being assigned to the single A, the low A level. So I think that's why you see the direct assignment up to high A. We haven't seen this very often, really, with Cubs prospects in the last 5 years or so. And it's just exciting to see. It's exciting to see Matt Shaw and Josh Rivera doing their thing. For the first game tonight, Matt Shaw was at shortstop and Josh Rivera was at third base, which I thought was kind of interesting there. But go back and watch the video. If you guys listening have not watched the video yet, Matt Shaw, first at bat, triples off the center field wall. Running around the bases was just, man, I watched that video so many times. It's so fun to watch him hit, so fun to watch him run. Excited to see watch him play on MILB TV every single day.
Yeah, I mean, the Cubs really like their prospects to touch every level. You know, they are more developmentally cautious than other organizations, you know, specifically like the Los Angeles Angels, for instance. But I will say that, you know, the Cubs would also say that they know Matt Shaw and Josh Rivera better than low A. And what they didn't want to happen, I think, was to send those guys to low A knowing it was going to be like a 2-week thing and really upset what's happening with that Myrtle Beach team, which is, you know, they're paying a ton of developmental attention to two guys in the middle infield in Jefferson Rojas and Christian Hernandez, and it's going really well the last couple weeks. So I just don't think they want to sort of upset that apple cart. They're just like, hey, we know these guys are going to high A by the end of the season anyway. Let's just do it now, and it's a lot easier to make happen with that roster than it would be with Myrtle Beach.
That's a great point, actually. Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I'm excited to see, and for both Shaw and Rivera, like, just spend the rest of the year at South. Like, these are not guys that, I mean, I guess there's an off chance that you see them promoted up to Double A, but I personally, I'd rather just see them do their thing for the rest of this year, in high A in South Bend.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance Rivera specifically goes up to Double A at some point. I think there's a chance that Matt Shaw plays in the Arizona Fall League. But there's going to be a good chunk of time here where those two guys are in the South Bend lineup, and that's just going to be a really good chance for guys like you and I to watch them a bunch and to really start to get our arms wrapped around how we view them as prospects and how we're going to think about them for 2024 and, you know, the ETAs that we're going to put on those guys and where they're going to slot into our rankings. So that's what's most exciting to me, is that it's at a place that's nearby where you and I both live, and just a place that has a great video team that's going to allow us to watch a bunch of games.
Exactly. It'll be curious to watch the defensive alignment for Matt Shaw, Josh Rivera, James Triantos, and Ed Howard the rest of the year. You got a shortstop in Ed Howard, who's been playing some second base, a second baseman in James Triantos, who plays some third base. And then you got Matt Shaw, who's a shortstop in college, but he probably fits better at second and third. And then you got Josh Rivera, who was a shortstop and kind of profiles as a shortstop, but came out and played third base in his first game. So I don't know, just super interesting. That'll be something to watch in addition to them, what they're doing at the plate. So,
and what I would caution is for people to not take too much meaning from however they do it in South Bend the next couple months. I think it's going to be more like just throw a bunch at the wall and see what sticks a little bit, and also just like experimenting and, you know, pushing Rivera at third base. Like, oh, that's an interesting look. Let's see what it does to his mentality at the plate and things like that. Like, they're just going to test these guys, and that's really the stage that they're in. And then they're going to go to instructs probably at the end of September, and it'll be much more pointed there. Like, hey, we want you to work at this position.
Yeah, defensive positioning in the lower minors, I can't emphasize enough how little you should read into that. you know, I like, it's with any guy, this situation, but really any guy. It's the same reason why the past couple of years, and even I'm still even seeing it sometimes this year. But the past couple of years, especially, we saw people shouting for Owen Casey to try first base. And it's like, he is let him work in the outfield, man. He's still super young. There's plenty of time to shift him over to first base once he reaches Double A, Triple A if you need him to. But Since I brought up Owen Casey, the last bit of housekeeping I wanted to talk about here that is not it is not promotion related is that Owen Casey, as of the time of this recording, Tennessee is still playing, but up to this point, Owen Casey has 2 home runs and 3 hits on the evening. So PCA leaves the lineup. Owen Casey picks up the slack. His OPS is for the season is up around 940, which is outrageously good for a guy his age in AA.
Yeah, I'm glad this is happening because, national media needs some big games like this to really remember to take stock of what he's doing because they have not done it yet. And he's not properly ranked yet. I've been saying it for a couple months now. I believe he's the second best prospect in the system. I believe that we should be talking about him as, another guy that could make a difference in 2024, potentially even the right answer for the right field in the second half of next season. And, another guy in the system that has legitimate all-star upside. I don't think he gets talked about in that way enough, but this is a big, impactful bat that is right on the precipice of the major leagues at 21 years old. It's crazy and doesn't get enough attention. So nights like this should be celebrated because it's just a chance for us to recognize what he's doing this year.
You want to talk some trades?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So really there was the one kind of major trade, and not even wildly major, but just major trade that the Cubs pulled the trigger. We're going to cover 3 of them here, the 3. But let's talk about DJ Herz, Kevin Made for Jeimer Candelario. So I've already hinted at it so far. This is fun. This is a fun trade. This is a weird trade. This is a cool trade. This is a sad trade. There's a lot of different ways to describe this. Before getting into the players, just real quick, it's kind of cool that Jeimer Candelario is back in the Cubs organization after coming up. He technically has a World Series ring playing. I think he played just 5 or 6 games for the 2016 Cubs.
Right.
And it's just fun to have him, a guy who came up, signed as a 16 or 17-year-old, came up the entire way through the Cubs system, back with the organization.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that was really starting to break through a little bit in the minors at sort of the most unfortunate time, which is like when the Cubs got an MVP and Rookie of the Year at the same position that he played. It's hard to find a guy who was more blocked than Jeimer was in 2016.
I went back and looked for past articles I'd written about him when he was still a prospect, and I had 5 articles written about how he was blocked by Chris Bryan and even Anthony Rizzo at first base, right. And that was obviously pre-DH days. So it was I just that's apparently all I wrote about back then was how Jeimer Candelario is blocked.
Yeah, and then, it's his now, and I think the Cubs are seeing this as, hey, we're going to spend the next 2 months trying to convince this guy to stick around a little longer. So, this is a rental by definition, but he's a really good fit for this organization moving forward. And, I think if they could get him on a 3-year deal this offseason at a, reasonable but pretty hefty chunk of change, I think the Cubs would love to do that. And I'm rooting for it to happen. I'm rooting for one of those sort of Nick Castellanos hot runs in the second half. And let's have some fun.
And the players going back were DJ Herz and Kevin Made, it's interesting with both of those guys because I think a year and a half ago we would be all bawling our eyes out. The Cubs traded DJ Herz and Kevin Made. I think they were both closer to top 10 prospects than what they are now, which is I think over at Northside Bound we have them kind of cumulatively, ranked in the mid 20s or so. Let's talk about Kevin Made first, because I think that you've been a little lower on Kevin Made up to this point. I mean, I guess up to this point is now he's no longer in the system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think what the highest I would have ever rated him was. I mean, maybe at the back end of the top 10. I can't remember, but right now I have him 38th, or I had him 38th in the system in my most recent update, right before he got traded. But I would say that I still see a path forward for him. I see there's still sort of that like perfect scenario at play where he hits just enough and he plays solid defense, and he's just like that sort of, I don't know, 15th to 20th best shortstop in the majors. Like that doesn't sound that great, but that's a really valuable player that teams value really highly, because that's a position that's really hard to find a average player at. And so I think that's sort of what I'd be looking at as like his sort of optimistic, maybe 80th to 90th percentile outcome. I think the Cubs have seen some things in terms of they just haven't been able to get him over the hump at hitting the ball harder. And that's probably the biggest thing that has sort of made him slide down rankings in the last 2 seasons, is just when it was, I'm trying to think. I mean, shortly after the Cubs signed him as a bonus baby, 7-figure guy as a 16-year-old, like I remember there being videos of his batting practices sort of over that next year and a half, and you could really see like, oh my gosh, if this kid's hitting balls like this in BP at age 17, it's going to be something special when he's 21. It just hasn't really gone that way. I mean, I think he hits it on the ground a lot, doesn't really hit it that hard. So it's just hard to profile the power in that same way. And so, it's tough. I mean, a guy I really liked following, a guy that got a lot better, but I think his upside is a little limited, and it's just sort of dampened down in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think you nailed some of the points that I was going to get at. I had some notes written down specifically about Kevin Made during my time seeing him in the Quad Cities and in Peoria, and I had 2 main notes on him. The first was that his defense is legit, and I'll get into that in a second. And then the other is that watching batting practice, he just doesn't hit the ball hard enough. That's all it comes down to. It's not like the softer contact, the lower exit velos are just not happening in games. I wasn't seeing it in batting practice all that much. Now, granted, I wasn't clocking his exit velos. I don't know the answer to that, but just based off the eye test. And so the thing with him at the plate is that we know that he's grown and he's changed, and who he is at the plate is a lot different than what he was back in 2021 in Myrtle Beach. I always reference that article that Jimmy Nelligan wrote. Second reference for Jimmy this episode. The article that Jimmy wrote over at Northside Bound about Kevin Made's 2021 season, where I think that the final number was that he got to a 2-0, 2-1, 3-1, or 3-0 counts. Like it was like 9% of his at bats the entire season long. Which is like outrageously low. He just wasn't getting in hitters counts. He was also swinging early and often. So he is no longer that player, right? He's walking at a 10 to 12% clip pretty consistently now. And so he's just a different player than he was back then, which it's pretty crazy. You can see him change that much over the course of 2 years. The body looks different. And so I think that with Made, like you're worried about, like now from the Cubs perspective, like looking at it from a Cubs fan, like hoping we didn't give up too much. I think that you're worried about that defense, which I think is legit. The arm is really good. I think he has he makes really solid plays in both directions, both like up the middle and to his backhand side at shortstop, but he can also play some second and third. So I think you're worried as a Cubs fan that you gave up too much by saying, I think he can stick at shortstop, maybe play some second and third if he needs to. And if he continues to change who he is as a hitter and maybe hit the ball a little bit harder, like that's a major league player for sure. And that's what you're worried about as a Cubs fan. Now, as a fan of watching Kevin Made over the past few years, like I hope that works out. I hope that he ends up being a major league contributor for the Washington Nationals in 2-3 years, probably 3 years or so. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean the calculus that I've sort of done in my head as I reverse engineer what the front office is thinking, and I might repeat this a little bit when we talk about DJ, is like I think the front office is thinking about, hey, this is a $200 million a year salary franchise, probably getting up towards $250 million in the next couple of years. A franchise that's spending that much is going to inevitably be have a really good option at shortstop. You're either going to go into free agency and spend a lot of money on a shortstop, or you're going to have bought a high-profile international free agent that got up through the system and is a stud at shortstop too. And so if you have a guy who's kind of a more like fringy upside shortstop, it's unlikely that that guy is going to break through as an option for a $225 million a year spending franchise. So if that's the case, if it's sort of unlikely that his upside is like the 15th best shortstop in the majors is going to be good enough to get him to Chicago, then the most useful thing you can do with his prospect pedigree is to trade him to get somebody who can help that major league team more. And I really do think the front office is sort of thinking that way with this trade and the two players that we're talking about. So I don't know. I kind of wanted to introduce that sort of concept that has been rolling around my head in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Not something I considered at all. Because I think that a lot of times it's easy to look at these prospects in a vacuum, right? Like who is he as a prospect? Not where does his skill set and his value fall for the organization? That's a really good point. I hadn't considered that. What are your thoughts as we transition over to DJ Herz? What are your thoughts on him and moving on and trading him along to the Nationals?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want us to be sure that we go through a section of why DJ's awesome and, you know, what we really enjoyed watching him the last couple of years, because it has been truly like a gift to see that dude dominate. But I want to sort of build off that point I just made about Kevin, because I think it applies there too, which is what I think happened is, you know, the Cubs really gave an effort this year to have DJ be a starter in Double-A the whole season. And I think they were trying to answer that question. Hey, can a franchise that spends $220 million a year that has 5 rotation spots, do we think it's likely that DJ eats up one of those? And I think that likelihood dropped this season, even though he's had a really good year. He just didn't have that monster step forward that you have to assure yourself one of those 5 spots. So if he's not likely to be one of those 5 starters in Chicago for a prolonged period of time, then you have to start thinking of him out of the bullpen. And this is a time where the Cubs feel really good about the guys they have in the bullpen on the left side at the top of the minors. You're talking about Luke Little, you're talking about Riley Martin, Bailey Horn. And then also that's just a position where you can get guys in free agency. You can get guys on the trade market to fill that spot, even though the Cubs don't have one on the major league team right now. So I think they looked at all that, and I think they were okay biting the bullet and making this trade. I do think they like DJ a ton. I think they do not believe he's going to fail. I think they think he's going to be a major league pitcher. It's just the role that it was likely to be in Chicago isn't high enough to justify not making the trade to get Jeimer.
Yep. I'll piggyback off that last kind of bit that you said, that I think that DJ Herz will be a major league pitcher. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in any direction, starter, reliever, piggybacker, one inning. Like I don't know what that role will be. I have no confidence in saying one over the other, but I'm pretty confident that he will, based off of all the things we've been talking about with DJ over the past 3-4 years, right? Where he's got the funky delivery, he's got the stuff, he's got the changeup is incredible. You'll hear in this interview that I'm going to play him talking about the tumble on his changeup and how it's not your typical changeup. He's going for more spin rate on that changeup, and the fastball, how it plays up from low 90s to mid 90s because of that delivery. And like it's all those things we talked about with DJ over the years. Like I feel so confident in those abilities. I don't know that it's as a starter long term. I also can't say for sure that it's a 1 inning guy. I don't know. And that uncertainty is maybe why he's going over to Washington. But I think this is our opportunity to talk about how awesome of a competitor that DJ Herz is, and how there's some guys in the system that I just wouldn't bet against. You know, even if they're putting up bad numbers, even if they've looked bad over the course of 2 months straight. Like there's some guys I wouldn't bet against, and DJ Herz is one of those guys because of that fire that he has, because of just the natural athletic ability, and he knows it's there and he wants to reach that full potential. Just a great all around human being in addition to baseball player.
Yeah, and one of the things we love about following the minor leagues is just watching people who get better. And when I think about the DJ that we sort of first saw when he came in the system, we're talking about just like athlete only, basically, who's just sort of feeling his way out on the mound, who had this like super unique delivery, total skinny guy, threw like a fastball that he probably, I'm guessing in high school never had to throw anything else and could just dominate hitters with just that fastball. But also like had some stuff going on with the curveball and changeup that were interesting. And then like, a year later, the changeup and the curveball are both looking really good. He's put on probably 20, 25 like really good pounds over the last couple of years. The delivery is less extreme. I think they allowed it to still be unique, but they smoothed out a lot of the parts of it. So he's just got, and he added the slider this year, which I think is going to be a really good pitch for him. That's going to help him get to the majors. So he's a guy that, even while he was dominating, and it's hard to even emphasize how much he dominated when he was with Myrtle Beach and won pitcher of the year for the Cubs farm system. It was disgusting how much better he was than hitters in that league. But he was never too proud to be like, I'm going to keep getting better. And that is unique, and that should be celebrated. Like, he's a guy that constantly was like, okay, what's the thing I can do to improve my chances of being a big leaguer? Not just, hey, I struck out 12 guys yesterday. Like, don't talk to me, I'm good.
Yeah, that's actually, so I think I cut this part out of this interview clip, but he mentioned on that interview with him, it was coming off of his 2021 season, and we asked like what his goals are for the 2022 season, and he was talking about how he wanted to strike out more batters, he wanted to be better than he was the year before, and we're like, dude, like, you were minor league pitcher of the year and you absolutely dominated, and he was like, yeah, but I want to be better, and it's like, and he legitimately thinks that he could be better off of that. Like he it wasn't like a bragging, it wasn't like, that was just his motivation. That was what he did to say, I'm going to be better. I want to be better. And that's how I continue to improve and climb up the ladder,
Yeah, and Double-A was kind of a punch in the face for him at first, and just to watch him sort of really push through, lean on that competitiveness, and I think in the last 6 weeks we've really seen DJ sort of turn the corner and be comfortable at that level and start to dominate that level. I think that's something national scouts saw, and why they ultimately were adamant about him being included in this trade. So hope that DJ goes to Washington, shoves the rest of this season, and then get him on the major league radar in 2024. Let's watch DJ pitch against the big league Cubs, and hopefully he has a quality start in a very close loss against the Cubs next season. I would love it.
All right, man. I'm gonna go ahead and take the opportunity now to kick it over to this interview that Jimmy and I had with him. This happened, like I said, in January of 2022 is when this interview went down. It's just, I think it holds a little extra special place in my heart because this was actually the first interview that we have interviewed a lot of different players. This is the first one where DJ actually reached out to us. And he said, hey, like, I want to be on the show with you guys. I want to come on and be interviewed, and like, I want to just chat baseball. And it's like, so that was a really cool thing to have him reach out and be curious about kind of just talking baseball and talking about what he's doing, So I'll go ahead and kick that to him now. It'll be for about, I don't know, I think I've got about 10 minutes cut, and afterwards I'll come back and we'll talk about these other couple trades that happened in the Cubs system.
Well, I guess how do you? He was talking about your grip and how it compares to killing spin versus not killing spin, and how it works as a changeup. You want to talk a little bit about how you make that work?
Yeah. So, well, I didn't know much going into coming into pro ball, with all the video stuff. So when they told me to just try this grip, there was 2 grips that they made me try. The first 2 were so-so, and then this grip, the Vulcan, it was when I threw it, the ball had just sink off my like fastball, and a lot of people like their changeups like stay playing with the fastball, and they don't really like fall or drop off the table, and mine just naturally did it, so we just stuck with it. But for me, it's like I'm trying to spin the ball. I'm trying to keep the spin efficiency. Some people like Max, he tries to kill it. For me, like my fastball spins at like I want to say like 2,400, and it's got like a spin efficiency of like 98 to 100%. And so my thinking with my changeup is I want to keep that same spin efficiency on the changeup, so it looks like a fastball coming out of my hand, so they can't pick up the spin or see like that the spin is something's off, and then they'll take it. Or so I'm trying to keep the spin efficiency like 90 or 90s and up, so it looks like a fastball. So I'm trying to spin the crap out of the ball, and I try to pronate through. Some people did just try to throw a natural. I actually try to like pronate, and I think I'm just like a natural pronator instead of supernator. So I think that's what helps me with the changeup a lot.
I mean, we love a guy. All baseball fans love a guy that pitches with emotion, and you're definitely up there pitching with emotion sometimes. How do you control like that emotion in a good way, right? That you getting excited about things that you've done and like channeling that to like be better on the mound. Like, how do you do that?
It just comes out natural. It just comes out, and like it usually like I know when to do it and when not to do it. And most of the times I'll do it when I do it, it's like a man gets on third with like no outs, or a man on third and second with no outs, and somehow I get out of that with no runs, and that fires me up, or striking out the side. But like I know when to like do it and when not to do it, but sometimes it just comes out like naturally, and if it fires me up and it pumps me up even more.
My favorite pitching with emotion from you this entire season. I gotta talk about. I don't know how we made it this far without talking about it. I clipped a video of you early on in the season where you threw a strike. I think it was strike 2, and then you waited there. You were waiting for the guy on the mound. You were sitting there on the rubber. He calls time, steps out of the box, and you go nowhere. Like you stayed planted on the rubber, waiting for him to get in. He gets in. Like tell him like time. Give me a second. As soon as the umpire points at you, you went and you struck him out with I think it was a curveball.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about is that do you do that all the time? Is that or were you just amped up for that at bat? Like what's up?
I just want to pitch, and I just want to go and get off the mound as soon as I can, because I just want to get I love pitching, and I just want to do it quickly. I don't like getting disrupted and stuff. So like if a guy or like an infielder will come to me, I'm like, what? Come on, let's go, let's hurry up. And then but yeah, I just like to go, and that's just kind of how I've always been. Especially if someone steps out, I'm like, let's go.
Rob Manfred, you are Rob Manfred's favorite player for pace of play, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
How did that change?
Morty was a good part of making the pitchers pitch at a faster pace in Myrtle Beach, because we were so young, and like he was telling us like nobody likes just to be waiting out in the outfield. That's when like mistakes start to happen, like crazy stuff or weird stuff starts to happen. So like if you keep guys on their toes, keep them in their progression, like in the infield or in the outfield, like creeping in and stuff, like it keeps them in the game. So like if you work at a slow pace, like they can like wander off. So keeping them in the game is like something big for me.
With lefties, I mean, like your release point is like behind their head too. Like that's got to be impossible for them to like pick that up.
Oh yeah. When I was in South Bend, Tony and the manager was saying it looked like I was about to hit them, throw the ball at them, and then the ball would go towards the plate. And I didn't realize I was that crossfire until I moved over to the left side or to the first base side of the mound. And that's when I really saw that I was like super crossfire, because when I was on the third base side, it was like I was landing in the same spot. So I was like, I didn't realize it. But once I moved over to the left side, it was, I could actually see the difference.
How did that whole process kind of go, like leading up to draft day?
The Cubs call in the like 7th round, and they were like, hey, we take this, we want you. And I was like, the Cubs was the best one. When I went to Wrigley for like the the workout, they had like a workout, and it just blew me away, like how awesome Wrigley was, Wrigleyville. I loved it, and I actually posted a picture when I went there in Wrigley, and just like me looking at like Wrigley, and then months later, I got drafted by the Cubs, and it was the only place like I wanted to go because the Diamondbacks called me in the third round and said, "Would you take this number?" And it was the same number that the Cubs got me for in the 8th round, and the Diamondbacks took this other guy, and I didn't want to like follow his path, so I declined the Diamondbacks, and and then when the Cubs called, I was like, that was the only team like that I would go at this low, and it was awesome, and I'm glad I made that decision.
So we usually at the end of interviews kind of ask, a player, like, who are some of the guys in the Cubs system that, us writers and podcasters aren't talking about enough?
Ooh, all right, let me think.
Gotta hype up your guys.
If I were to say one, I'd probably go with Made. Kevin
Made?
Made's a beast. That anytime the ball was hit to him, I'd walk off the mound. Didn't even have to look. I mean, Made had big trust, and he made some crazy plays, like some plays like I definitely thought he was going to get one out, and then he throws it the second, and we get a double play, and I'm like, yo, how did he just do that? Or like diving catches, and it was just, he's super experienced for as young as he is, and but I would definitely say that would be like the sleeper of that people like are sleeping on.
All right, that was so cool. Loved having DJ for that. Wish him nothing but the best moving forward. But now we will go ahead and kind of move on to a couple other trades, because there were other trades. Not a whole lot happened, but we did get. Let's cover the Nelson Velazquez trade first, right? The Cubs traded away Nelson Velazquez to the Kansas City Royals for Jose Cuas, who's a reliever, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit because Nelly, even though I think he's graduated from prospect status. Actually, Nelly might not have, but he kind of fits in that prospect mold. So we'll chat about him a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, I really went into the last couple of days feeling like he was the most likely guy to get traded. I know that's sort of easy to say now, but I wrote as much over at Bleacher Nation. And really, it was when that hot streak started in the last 2 weeks. I mean, he went on a little homer binge over about a 6-day period where he hit a bunch of home runs, like we know that Nelly's capable of doing. He's a very sort of hot and cold hitter, and when he gets hot, it's just insane. And I kind of figured that there were going to be some scouts at those games that were going to be like, this is a guy who has untapped potential. This is a guy who, we could put in our major league roster of the team that we work for. And he's going to, if he gets some run and he gets to go through some growing pains, he's going to be successful. And I think that's going to happen. I think the Royals got a player that's going to help them. I think if we judge this trade in a couple of years at which guy produced more WAR for their team, the Cubs are going to lose this trade. I think Nelson is going to outproduce Jose Cuas in terms of WAR in the next few years. I think the Cubs part of that is that they just didn't see a path forward for Nelly to get the 400, 500 more at bats he's going to need to be super comfortable. So they made the move here.
What a strange dynamic with this trade, because I think that everybody feels that same way, right? Where it feels like the Kansas City Royals got the bigger haul. And I think that we're saying it now. I think that most just like casual fans are saying it. I think that like Kansas City Royals fans, I think everybody's saying that, but we're still kind of just okay with it, because the Cubs have built up that outfield depth that we knew they were going to trade from, whether it was, I guess just AAA depth, right? Between Nelson Velazquez and Jonathan Perlaza and Luis Vasquez and Jared Young, just guys like that there's just a lot of depth. And so I'm really happy. I was talking with someone literally the day before the trade deadline. I go, hey, like Nelson Velazquez would be a perfect fit for the Kansas City Royals. I was like, it just like they can take him and he can play basically every single day and try to see what his value is over the course of a season, as opposed to over the course of 3 weeks when it could be a cold stretch. It could be a hot stretch. He needs that like prolonged amount of time to see what that value is, using both the hot stretch and the cold stretch. You know what I mean? So what do you got on Jose Cuas? I know you were kind of digging into him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of been preparing for Nelly to be traded for a rental reliever, and so it was kind of exciting that he ended up getting traded for a guy that, if he works out, he could be with the organization for 5 more seasons after this one. And this is a guy that has the potential to really work out. Really unique story, like was a hitter, it was not working, left pro baseball. I think he was working at Home Depot or something. Um, Started pitching again, went to the Frontier League. I think there's a story out there that he was inspired by Francisco Rodriguez with his Frontier League team. Started with the sidearm delivery, and just took off like so quickly. Got to the major leagues from there in just maybe 2 seasons or something. So really, really fun story, and I think I brought up on Twitter Scott Efros as a guy that has a sort of similar release point, and I think someone the Cubs saw that when Scott went to sidearm, they were really able to help him utilize what made him unique to be successful, and I think that's giving them some confidence that they can do the same with Quas, who when you look at the stuff plus numbers that he has and you get into sort of the nerd data, you see some stuff that he should be more successful than he's been in terms of just ERA. So I think the Cubs think they can do some work and have a guy who's a sort of sub 3.5 ERA reliever really quickly. I know some people are, expecting him to have a prolonged stint in Iowa here. I do not expect that. Like they might put him through a real quick program, but I think they're seeing him as a big league reliever that can help right away. And I think it's always useful to have a guy who gives you a really weird look out of the bullpen, and his release point does that.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I'll say that we stand a sidearm reliever king. I mean, that's I just love like I've talked so many times about how I just like quirky things out of my pitchers, and a sidearmer is that to a T. So I'm all about the Jose Quas. I'm excited to see him work. Like you said, I'm excited to see him up at the big leagues. That's why he was acquired, for him to make an impact at the big league squad this season, even though he's under team control for a while after this. So, all right. The other trade that we saw was probably in my eyes, the weirdest one of the deadline for the Cubs. They sent Manny Rodriguez and Adrian Sampson away to the Tampa Bay Rays for Josh Roberson. And obviously, Adrian Sampson is not a prospect. Manny Rodriguez graduated from prospect status. Both those guys were on 40-man rosters and then outrighted off of 40-man rosters. I want to hit on Manny a little bit, and less because of what he is now and more about what he kind of when he jumped onto people's radars and what that meant for some fans. Because with Manny, he debuted, I believe. I don't know if he debuted or he was just pitching that day, right after a lot of the or right during a lot of the 2021 trade deadline chaos with Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo and Javi and all those guys. And I distinctly remember Manny Rodriguez coming in and pumping like 99 to 101 mile an hour heat. And thinking that like, this is all I have to hang my hat on right now. Like it's Manrod throwing gas when we just lost all these great players. And it was such a strange like feeling to watch that and watch this reliever that I was like excited about, but I couldn't be excited because everything else was so sad. But I think that he goes into an organization with the Rays that like, if I'm a pitcher, of course I want to be with the Tampa Bay Rays, Yeah,
I mean, Manny's a sort of example of he was the first. He started to break the dam of, okay, the Cubs pitching development is starting to really change. Like, here's this guy that had a 6 ERA in low A, and then fast forward like 12 months, and he's on the 40-man roster, and then a few months later, he's debuting throwing 100-mile-per-hour sinkers. It was really the wake-up call, like, okay, the Cubs are going to start to have some homegrown arms finally that we've been begging for. And ultimately he wasn't quite as successful as I think we all hoped he would be in those moments. I think the injury that he missed a good amount of time with, I don't think he ever was quite as live. The fastball never kind of quite had that same zip to it that it did before the biceps injury. And the other factor is like the Cubs worked really hard to find a breaking ball that was a great fit in the major leagues, and I don't think they could quite break through with it. I mean, he had a really good curveball when he was added to the 40-man roster. They were adamant to change it to a slider. I think they tried a slider with some sweep and then went back to a slider that's more sort of straight down. That's a place where the Nationals are going to be really helpful. I think the Nationals have a lot of confidence in their ability to say, hey, we like this pitch. We don't want you to tinker from it. Like, we want you to learn to throw this pitch with great location and stick with just this pitch and be confident in it, I guess. So I'm excited for that for him because his arm strength is capable of being a really helpful big league reliever, and I hope it happens for him in Tampa.
Any thoughts on Josh Roberson, who we were able to acquire from the Tampa Bay Rays?
I mean, the funny thing about this trade, this trade is so weird for like 5 different reasons. But one of them is like, you can pretty much like say a lot of the same things that we said about Manny, about Josh Roberson. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's 96 to 98 with the fastball with a slider that's 89 to 91. I mean, that's almost exactly what Manny is. So it's, I think in large part it's a change of scenery trade.
A little bit of cost savings on the Cubs end, I'd imagine.
Yeah, the Cubs saved a little bit because Adrian Sampson was above the minimum. We don't know exactly, I guess, what money's trading hands there. The Cubs had to kick in some international free agency money to close the deal, which is another just weird part of this. So what's really interesting to me, and I don't feel like I know the answer, is like, who was the best player traded in this trade?
That's
like,
a good point.
Does everybody agree that there was one best player? Like, do the Rays and Cubs both think there was one guy in this that was like above everyone else? Or is it one of those where the Cubs think they got the best player and the Rays think they got the best player? I don't know the answer to that.
And the thing is, they're all 3 of these guys are minor league free agents at the end of this year. So maybe it even comes down to something where it's like, all right, Manny Rodriguez and Adrian Sampson, like they were not going to re-sign a successor contract with the Cubs. But and Josh Roberson was not going to sign a successor contract with the Rays, but maybe each of them will do that with their new squad. You know what I mean? They want to get a chance with a new organization, and maybe that happens for Roberson with the Cubs. So that's interesting. I immediately thought, like, obviously very similar to Manrod. I think that we're already seeing Josh Roberson with Cam Sanders in Iowa, right? Like electric stuff. Can't find the zone, although Cam has been better recently, but like. I think Roberson and Cam Sanders are, without seeing a whole lot of Roberson pitch in game action, like they're very similar in a lot of ways. So that's interesting. All right. Anything to wrap up this trade deadline as far as the guys we traded away from a prospect slant?
The prospect slant part of it that I would add is I come away from this deadline and the fact that they didn't add really like one reliever that I think they can really feel good is going to be helpful for the rest of the season. I think that says that they believe in Danny Palencia. I think if they didn't believe in Daniel Palencia, then there would be no doubt in their mind that they were a reliever or 2 relievers short of a good enough bullpen to succeed. I think what Palencia has done in the last couple outings convinced Jed that he is ready to be a helpful reliever down the stretch for a team that's trying to get into the playoffs. And so, like, I view what happened today as a vote of confidence in Palencia, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is. You love to see that. We're all big Danny P fans here, so that is awesome to see. And my big takeaway from all this is that considering that another deal right at the deadline did not get done for a reliever or any other type of player, my takeaway from this is that it might be kind of obvious, but I'm looking at the system now, and I view on August 1st, I think the system is better now than it was on July 1st before the draft. I think the subtractions of Herz and Made and Nelly or whoever, those do not outweigh the additions of Matt Shaw and Josh Rivera and Jackson Wiggins and all the guys they drafted. So I think this month comes out as a net positive for the Cubs in the prospect department, which is fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Let's go real quick. I want to talk a little bit about, because we're going to get in this interview with Frankie Scalzo, but leading into that, I want to talk a little bit about what I saw from the South Bend Cubs in Peoria this past week, and kind of defer to you if you have any questions on any of it. I think that I have three main notes from my time in Peoria and watching batting practice and seeing how guys move and interviewing some guys and stuff like that. The first is about James Triantos. And James Triantos knows how to hit. I actually did an interview with him. I'm hopefully having a little written piece with that interview with James Triantos coming up soon, so you guys are getting a sneak peek here. But when I would ask him any questions about what his mindset is or the way in which he goes about hitting, it just sounds so simple from his perspective. Like, he just knows naturally how to hit. I just go up there and I just hit the ball. And I kept asking him about what it's like to be able to, like, how he balances not swinging and missing with hitting for more power. And more or less the answer just continued to be, I just go up there and, like, this is what I do. I've never swung and missed. I asked him about, like, that folklore about him only swinging and missing twice in his senior year of high school. And he corrected me and said that he actually swung and missed 3 times his senior year of high school. So what a chump. I asked him where the pitcher was that made him swing and miss. And he said one of them was at, I think, Virginia Tech now. So no slouch, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when you describe, like, his philosophy there, I think what really, like, what that tells me is just he's a guy that sees the ball out of a pitcher's hand, like, better than other people, and then also has amazing hand-eye coordination. And so I think, like, guys that think in that really simple way are just on a different planet in terms of, like, just completely able to succeed as, like, see ball, hit ball guys, which is really cool, because, like, there are a lot of major league players that can't do that really have to sort of, like, game out their plate approach in a much more, like, thoughtful and sort of, like, planned out way, where I think guys as naturally talented as James are just able to be like, I'm going to just watch what comes out of the pitcher's hand and then, like, decide, and then, I'll hit the ball if it's a strike. And, it's pretty cool when you see that talent up close and personal.
And his first little mini breakout of power is happening this year. He just homered again tonight on Tuesday. So that power is coming for Triantos. Another guy who has power that I wanted to talk about is Christian Franklin, who he also homered tonight. And I think that he went on a 3-game stretch of homering, and I think he's on another 3-game stretch of homering in back-to-back games. Watching Christian Franklin hit is something else, man. Like, he's been on a different level since he came back from the injured list stint, or development list stint. He was down in Mesa. Since coming back, he's been hitting the ball a whole lot better. Watching him in batting practice, he's one of those, like, he was one of the best at making high quality contact and, like, watching the ball go far in batting practice. Like, he was just hitting tanks to center field. Now, is the hit tool, like, what is that? What is the hit tool long term? I don't know, and that's always kind of been the question with him. But I'm here to tell you that the pop is legit with Christian Franklin.
How was he moving, and, like, how did you view his athleticism up close and personal?
The athleticism looked really impressive. I know that he seemed to be putting in some extra effort and really hustling after balls in both in the outfield, backing up plays, sprinting hard out of the box, trying to leg out the extra base, stuff like that. And I think so. He's looking good. He must feel good in doing that. And I think the athleticism plays, and I think I see that athleticism even in the box too, not just, like, out in the field or on the bases, but I think I see that athleticism there, and that's going to be super, super important if he can continue that athleticism and, like, be fluid at the plate and not rigid, because we know that, like, We know the pop is there when he makes contact, but like so much of that is going to be, can he get to the high fastball? Can he get to the breaking ball down out of the zone and make contact to foul it off? So it's like that athleticism has to play in the box. And I came away pretty impressed with it.
I mean, in a lot of ways, he reminds me the most of a guy we literally just talked about, Nelson Velazquez, in the way of, there are times like Nelly is right on that line. He lives on that line of like a guy who's sort of maxed out his upper body, like in the weight room, and a guy who's like clinging on to the athleticism, like that raw athleticism that he had when he was a teenager. And I think when Nelly's at his best is when you can still really feel that athleticism, like in everything in the field, but mostly like at the plate. And I see a little bit of that with Christian too, where like at times it can be like, oh, is he starting to like age into like rigidity a little bit? And then you see a different week and you're like, no, like still like that's a athlete, that's a professional athlete. And so when I'm going to like review him this offseason and think about him as a prospect, that's going to be the thing that's most on my mind. Is like, where is he falling on that athleticism sort of like plus or minus scale, and the higher that shows up as plus, the higher he's going to move up my rankings.
You know who else is a freak athlete? Is Kevin Alcantara.
Yeah.
So he's injured right now. Actually, I did not check for him in the lineup tonight. I think he's still out. And when I was watching him in South Bend, he was still out. He was out on the field, taking BP, going through some drills to see how he was doing. Still walking around pretty gingerly during his, like very gingerly actually on Tuesday and Wednesday when I saw him. And so I don't know when the plan is for him to come back, but on Tuesday I saw him taking batting practice. And because of that lower body injury, which I believe is a bruised knee, is what came out in The Athletic. He was just taking BP basically with his top half. He was just swinging with his arms, a little bit of his like shoulder. Like, it was basically just a full arm swing with no lower body at all. And the dude was still hitting absolute bombs, dude. Like it was, he was hitting the longest home runs on the team just with his top half. Over the berm out. I don't know for any of you guys listening that know how the Peoria Chiefs field is set up. He was hitting it over the left field berm out in deep left field, and just doing it with top half. It's ridiculous. It's absurd.
Yeah, we're just like, we're at the very beginning of like getting to experience how fun he's going to be. It's ridiculous talent.
All right. Should I go ahead and kick it to this interview?
Yeah, let's tell us, intro a little bit, like Frankie, who he was a little bit when you got to know him through interviewing him, and I want to hear a little bit about that just ahead of your interview.
So we had Sam Wiederhaft was on the show last week. He was our last co-host. And after I hung up, stopped recording with Sam, I was chatting with him about how I was planning on going to Peoria, and I was asking for recommendations on like who's the best vibe to interview, like just like in general, like who's a fun interview, who should I chat with. I'm not looking for anything too awful serious, but because I figured that Cade Horton had been a pretty busy man during his time in South Bend and Myrtle Beach this year, so I was just looking for who's a fun interview to have. And the first person that came to mind for Sam was Frankie Scalzo Jr. He was like, just have it, Frankie. Just ask and see if Frankie's available, and if so, you won't regret it. I was like, all right, sounds good. So I get to Peoria, and I was talking to BK, and I go, hey, is Frankie available? And he said, yeah, I'm sure Frankie's available. I was like, all right, cool, sounds good. And so I was chatting with him a little bit before. Frankie Scalzo is an absolute vibe, man. Like he is so like, the quirky reliever. That is who he is. He might as well be a lefty. I know he's a righty, but he might as well be a lefty in the way that his like demeanor is. I asked him before I started recording. You won't hear this here, but I was asking him about his coffee preferences, and I heard he's kind of a coffee connoisseur, and I was asking him about what how he finds good coffee places when they're at away series and on the road. And he went into this whole big spiel about like how he first uses Yelp, and if the city doesn't have enough Yelp reviews, then he goes to Google, and if not, then he just like kind of bases it based on like what he's seeing in the pictures and the frontage of the store. Like, it was terrific. Like, I could be able to I would pick his brain for a long time, even non-baseball related stuff. So super, super fun. In this interview, we talk almost entirely about just baseball stuff, obviously. It's a short interview. I think it's about 5 or 6 minutes long. But I talked to him a little bit about what it's like playing different roles out of the bullpen, starting, relieving, piggybacking, closing games, stuff like that. And then kind of without me having to get into it and dig it out of him too awful much, he started talking quite a bit about that mindset and the mentality about throwing different pitches, the way in which he kind of uses spin rate. I don't know how much I kept in of this, but uses spin rate and kind of uses his sweeper versus his fastball to cut right on the fastball. The dude is just super, super intelligent. He knows baseball and he's fun to listen to for sure. So
awesome.
I will cut to this interview. Just a heads up, the South Bend team during batting practice was playing some phenomenal Latin music. So you're probably going to hear that in the background of this interview. I tried to tone it down a little bit. You might still hear a little bit of it, but you can definitely hear Frankie over the music in the background. So enjoy this, and we will be back to sign off on this episode right after this interview plays. So I know that since you've been here in the system, you've kind of seen a lot of different roles, right? I mean, you've been closing down games, you've been piggybacking. I think you started a couple of games. I mean, you've been all over the place. How does your mindset change over the course of time for those different roles? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's constantly changing, and I think it changed a lot more early on in my career when I didn't really know who I was as a pitcher necessarily. I was still young, being a pitcher only through college and everything, and then being drafted, learning still who I was out on the mound, knowing that competing out there is probably my best advantage. Yeah. And when I was being a piggyback early on in my career in Myrtle, I would try pacing myself through the game and being okay, if I throw a good changeup here, it'll set up my curveball, where that's not me at all out on the mound. I'm more that hey, names get called, okay, I'm up there, now I'm out on the mound, being present where my feet are, competing every pitch, and knowing that that's my approach that I need when I'm out there.
Did that change your approach before the games, or is it just once you're out there on the bump?
More when I'm out there, or my prep work while I'm in the bullpen. Okay. Not necessarily prior. I would have nerves and anxiety knowing that I was throwing that day necessarily when I was a set piggyback, but I mean, you still sort of know when you're throwing now in the games, when you're hot, when you're not. So I think that eased up a little bit, knowing that I am more comfortable when I'm out there, when I'm competing, when I know who I am, how I am when I'm pitching.
Do you have a preference on what role you're in?
I do like being later in the game, more leverage, more just adrenaline and everything. It's maybe easier to get that adrenaline, but now being that mature pitcher that I am, growing into that role, you could spark it up yourself. You don't need any outside source, but it does help. It's fun. It's nice. It's a different type of energy that you can't control.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that your season this year, I mean, you were looking good last year. You're looking even better this year. What do you think has changed the most over the course of your time in the system so far?
I will say adding another pitch. Throwing this slider a lot more now, upwards of 30%, which is awesome. And it's nice being able to develop a pitch like that just through the off season and a little bit of instructs. Being confident with that pitch, knowing that it is a pitch I could throw at any count now. I think that was probably the biggest change from season to season. But like I said, just maturing as that pitcher, as the guy that not questioning things when I'm out there, questioning if this thing's going to move enough or not, just being confident in every pitch and being where your feet are, knowing that your defense got you and having fun out there.
You've done the prep work beforehand, so you don't have to worry about is this slider going to work now. It's just go out and do it.
Exactly. I've thrown 1,000 of those sliders. Exactly. I can do that. Yes.
Is it sweeper? Is that what you're using?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Was that was this off season then that you were working on that?
It was instructs.
It feels like everybody's doing that.
Yes. Yeah. I was in the lab back in Arizona, and they were like, "Hey, try this." I was like, "Okay, let's do it."
Is it just easier to throw? Is that or easy to adjust to? Why is that such a
It's a bigger pitch, which is harder to land. A lot of people like the gyro or down ball sliders that are necessarily more like a strike throwing pitch because they don't move as much. But I enjoy throwing this whirly because it does move a lot. It is a fun pitch and it's nice. It's comfortable because I've always spun a ball. I've always had a good knuckle curve, and then I think I've had the ability to spin and locate that and it just translated easily with the slider, which is nice.
Are you looking to like land that out of the zone, or is that looking to get swings and misses in the zone with that pitch?
Hopefully in the zone,
Okay.
and even like fool them almost, as in it starts out the zone and then ends up in the zone. It's awesome to see that when I do throw this swing and miss pitch like down and away, it still gets swings, but you have to establish that first with landing in the zone.
Are you big into like pitch data and stuff like that, or is that not your thing? You're just going out there and doing what the coaches say?
Not necessarily. It's a thing I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
We didn't have it in college or anything, so it's a thing that I'm always open to learning, and I enjoy seeing like how much that pitch moved or how like the spin axis and everything. And I think it's a great development tool. It's something last year I dove pretty heavily in it, and I think it actually affected me when I was out of the mound, like trying to make it move as much and be as nasty as you can. Where, like you said prior, I've thrown that slider 100 times, like 1,000 times. You can land it out there. So I think there's a healthy mix of using it.
Last thing with the pitches, what's up with your fastballs? I know that it looks like it just has a little bit of late life. I mean, you're throwing it mid 90s now, but like it just feels like it has even more late life to that. Is there something there that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, we've been trying to add a little bit more cut ride to it. Last year I was showing a little bit more ride on like arm angle a little bit, so it would have a little jumpiness to it, but now we're getting a little bit more cut to it, and it's nice throwing. I set up across my body, throw a little bit across my body, so I think it's almost jumping on the hitters, just going towards them a little bit later, something different.
Yeah, that's the Justin Steele special in terms of that he does that like to
yeah.
perfection, right? Like that's what he does.
Yeah, and going with like the maturity of the pitch, I think it's conviction behind that. You know, throwing it, knowing what it does, where it's going to be, and knowing that, hey, even if I throw it down the middle, they don't have a good chance at hitting it. It's still funky. It's still a good pitch.
Anything you're working on in particular right now?
Getting this changed at back. It's been flashing in the games lately, and I think it was something to do with learning that slider and just spinning the ball so much that now pronating and like getting off of balls a little bit differently. But I mean, maturing, learning, adapting like as we go. So learning that fourth pitch and actually adding all the other pitches back into the arsenal is really fun to see.
Yeah. I'm always last thing. I'm always looking for new guys to talk about on the podcast. Just like guys to hype up, guys that I'm maybe not talking about enough. Who's one of your teammates that needs more love?
More love?
Yeah.
I think Jacob Wetzel is always a good candidate.
Yep.
I don't know if you're talking about Adam Lasky that much, but he's a great dude, great competitor. And then an overall good soul guy, probably Jared Wright. Jared Wright is a great human being.
I love it. I love it. There's been plenty of guys on this team this year, between guys that started here and guys that bumped up, that have just been fun to talk about. So, and I appreciate you taking the minute to chat. All right, and thank you so much again to Frankie for that interview. Again, absolute vibe. He's incredible every time I talk with him. Nothing but good things. Hopefully that he gets the call up to Tennessee soon. I think that there's a pretty safe bet that he does, considering how successful he's been in South Bend, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, a guy that really improved his like stuff profile this year, and if you read The Athletic, like those two beat writers have written about Frankie a couple times this year as somebody who's impressed the front office brass. So he's put himself on the radar, and I'm glad to hear that he's also like got the mentality for it, because that's going to help him succeed in AA.
For sure. All right, man. This has been a long episode. We had a lot to cover. It's been fun. You want to plug anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be at Bleacher Nation writing stuff like the next 2 weeks. Definitely going to dive deep into what PCA is looking like in Iowa. Those Cade Horton starts are going to get a lot of attention for sure, and try to watch these South Bend games as much as possible. So probably just cranking out sort of the normal stuff for a couple weeks and just diving deep into the video.
I love it. You can follow him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. Do you have a Threads? Do you have anything else?
I don't know. I mean, we do have the Discord that we've been hanging out at, and we'll probably plug that on our Twitter a little bit. But I have not jumped into the other worlds yet.
Well, you can find me over on Threads sometimes. I don't know. I'm trying to ease into that a little bit. That's just Cubs on Deck over there. But you can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find this podcast anywhere. Leave a rating and review if you would. That would be terrific. You can find us on our Northside Bound YouTube page. Leave a comment, all that good stuff. We'll try to respond as promptly as possible. And really, thank you guys so much. These are always fun episodes every year, kind of coming out of the trade deadline, talking about new guys in the past, talking about kind of giving a heads up on what we lost, I guess, this year. But this is kind of a different dynamic since I've been podcasting. We've always kind of covered the new prospects we've acquired in some sell-offs. So this is unique. This was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And in the meantime, we will be back in your ears in one short week. Thank you guys.
Go Cubs.
Yo.